Don't say fuck or bugger.
Yeah. It's just setting up now. Okay, I believe we are live. So if you want to just give it a minute, I'll just keep an eye on it, see when people join onto it. Yep, we've got people viewing now, so we've got like 9 people on.
Oh, cool. That's cool.
Probably go up a little bit once people get the notifications.
I assumed it was all going through via Zoom. I didn't realize you broadcast on Facebook Live as well. That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's posted in the group now. We got 13 people watching. It'll probably go up 15
cool.
now. Yeah, they say we probably give it a minute for a few people to tune in and then just kind of get on the way.
Of course. Welcome to my loft, guys. This is
some nice whiskey in there.
Chris, we're not far from each other, really, are we? So
no, we're not at all. We're in the same town now. Yeah, since you
exactly.
moved there.
Same borough. Not far at all.
Yeah, I think we're good to go, Nate. So I'll just open up. Evening, everybody watching. We've got some of us on tonight. We've got myself, Chris Neville. We've also got Andrew Watson, and we are delighted to be joined by Nate Booker, who is the brand ambassador for Old Forester in the UK. And yeah, I mean, I'm gonna hand over to Nate right now, to be honest, because he's going to speak a little bit about the brand, and then later on we can do some questions and encourage everybody, of course, to get a drink. I mean, I've got a pint of Guinness. I'll probably pour myself something. Get a whiskey on the go.
Hashtag please drink responsibly.
Always.
Invisible.
My invisible bottle. But trust me, it's 1920.
Oh well, I've got a bottle of single barrel, which is nice today. Hey,
I said King.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, man.
Sorry, I'm a little bit late.
It's okay.
Fashionably.
You'd think with all this staying at home stuff, life would be easier, but it's not when you got 2 kids in the house. But
I was saying, I don't think I've ever been busier, to be honest, in the last week.
Oh, really?
Say that I've been working at home. I've been so busy just doing bits and bobs. For those amongst you, I'm a massive nerd. I play Dungeons & Dragons, and I've had organised like 3 games with bartenders this week, which has been that's the most
mate, if I said to my wife, that's the reason I've been busy.
No, dude, honestly, my girlfriend was like, you what?
I've been so busy. I've had to host 3 games of Dungeons & Dragons with my mates.
Yeah.
You take a rest, Andrew.
Mate, that is literally what my girlfriend was like as well, so don't worry. Awesome. I'm in a dog house also. But, awesome. Cool. So, yeah, these I haven't actually seen. I was busy last week because I have a really incredibly busy social life now because there's nothing else to do. So I didn't see the one you guys did last week, but I'm guessing you guys kind of interject with the questions. Is that right? Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. So I was going to kind of keep it kind of broad to start, and then kind of like get down into the specifics a little bit later and focus on the kind of it's like the BBC interview into the specifics of the brand a little bit later. Just because in the group I noticed that there's a lot of new members that sign up all the time, and I wonder if they know about bourbon, as much as they were getting started on the journey, first bottle of whiskey, having a bourbon and Coke, where do we take them from there? So that's what I was kind of thinking with this. So I've got some pictures to share later on down the line, but ultimately it's going to be a broad stroke of bourbon with a little bit of bourbon history, and then obviously finishing up with Old Forester. Is that cool?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, yeah. Great. Well, you guys are going to be my audience, so you need to give me some feedback. because there's
Yeah, we will do.
Sure.
Otherwise,
Well,
basically,
we're also conscious that they nobody wants to hear us speak. It's all about you, Nate. So do your thing. We'll
Right.
interject when we need to.
Well, I was saying to Chris earlier, otherwise this is basically just me just drunk in a room talking to myself, which is not uncommon, but ultimately, embarrassing that I'm broadcast to the world. So, okay, cool. So really with American whiskey, a good way to think about it is A, B, and C. So with specifically with bourbon. So A, America, B, barrels, and C, corn. So, America is so kind of important to the development of, of American whiskey, also bourbon, because in reality, if you think about the identity of Americans, it is very much like it has very much revolved around the development of bourbon. Really, it's been so kind of tied into their structure and into their kind of cultural development that now today, or in the 1960s, was put into their kind of recorded in the court of law as saying that it's the native spirit of America. It's their kind of indigenous liquid. I'm going to bring my camera a bit forward so I don't, not so massive under chin there. Sorry, guys. I'm recording on my phone, by the way, down here, and I'm watching it on my laptop here, which is really, really distracting. But ultimately, in the 1960s, they kind of said, like I say, in a court of law, that American whiskey was a liquid, the native spirit of America. And I kind of like to think about it like that. This stuff, is the American dream embodied in a liquid form. It's the distilled spirit of America, which I think is quite interesting. But also as well, if you think about the country that it comes from, most bourbon comes from Kentucky. Not all of it, obviously, as we know. There's it's a vast country, but quite a large proportion of it comes from Kentucky. And Kentucky is very, very different to somewhere like Aberdeen. So imagine the whiskey in Kentucky. In the really hot summers, it expands, and in the winter it contracts. Whereas in Aberdeen, it's relatively sedentary. The temperature is relatively similar throughout the course of the year. So the whiskey doesn't kind of expand and contract inside the barrel as much as it would do in somewhere like Kentucky. So I think chatting to Chris Morris, who's the distiller for Old Forester, he was saying that whiskies from Kentucky develop flavour, kind of in intensity of about 2.5 times faster than somewhere like Scotch whiskey. So that's why when we look at like a 4-year-old bourbon, like Old Forester, and if everyone's at home, have a little smell, have a little taste, you'll notice this really, really big hit of vanilla, and a lot of kind of power. This is only 4 years old, and a lot of bourbon is only 4 years old. Blended usually from different batches, but the minimum age is 4 years old. And all that kind of big flavor is coming from the behavior of the barrels in the climate of Kentucky, so it's a really kind of important part of it. Also as well, I think that it kind of represents the kind of, the rebellious nature of America. Very similar to now. Everyone hated the British back in the days, kind of in the 1700s, 1800s. And the heavy taxation on the import of molasses and rum kind of meant that the new American people had to develop their own type of, their own indigenous spirit. And using kind of native grains that they found kind of in the area, they developed corn whiskey. Awesome. Cool. Awesome. Great. Okay, great. That was. I'll take that as a thumbs up. The silence was a thumbs up.
Well, no, thumbs up from us, mate. Quick question: Why did you get in? What made you get into all this yourself?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I probably should have talked where I'm from. So, guys, I work for Old Forester. I've been in the hospitality industry for about 20 years. I have been working for bourbon brands, Woodford before this, for about 5 years, coming up to 6 years, and in top-end cocktail bars in the north. If you've ever been to Epinay or Mr. Cooper's bar, I was there for a long time. That's kind of where I kind of cut my teeth. And I just kind of, I love teaching people things, and I love the dopamine hit of kind of making someone's evening amazing. Kind of when you make someone a drink and you kind of you see the smile on their face. That I kind of really enjoy that, and I think that's kind of why I wanted to get into advocacy and training and that kind of side of things, is because I really wanted to share that added value kind of aspect, that kind of things that you can't, that the average customer won't take the time to learn. I wanted to share with them as part of their drink kind of service profile, that kind of service. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Can I ask you a question on Epinay, actually? Funnily enough, Epinay is where a few lads in the group used to work in Spinningfields. We used to go drinking there. I wonder if you were working there. It was about 2012, and that's actually where I started drinking old fashions, and when I started getting into old fashions.
I probably served you, dude. I left Epinay in 2012 October to go and travel in Australia, and that's kind of that was where I really cut my teeth. So in Manchester, I started working at Epinay in 2006 in Leeds, moved over in 2009 to Manchester, and then kind of took over it and kind of did it. So we've probably met before, even before now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I've been in the industry a long time. I've met a lot of people. I've had a lot of hangovers, guys. I'm not gonna lie. I've done a lot of night shifts. Anyway, I digress. So yeah, so working in advocacy and being a brand ambassador, it's a really fortunate position to be in. I get to talk about things I really love, which is really, really nice. But there is also that kind of the less kind of glamorous part of it, which is sitting on trains, waiting at train stations, and kind of just being delayed, particularly now as well. Like everyone's homebound, right? So we have to we do it online, which is a whole new world to me. I was saying before everyone else kind of joined the stream, I was saying that I'd never really been into video conferencing, so this is kind of really new to me as well. So anyway, I digress, and I will do that a lot tonight, people, by the way, just so you know. From America, let's talk about barrels. They're kind of really, really integral to the development of the flavor profile. So if everyone's got, I'm sure that most of the people on the stream have a glass of whiskey, I would imagine. I'm gonna guess anyway. So when you look at a bourbon, it's a really natural product. I'm not going to say, when I say organic, I don't mean organic as in the kind of like certified organic, that kind of stuff, but it's a life cycle product. It's all of the flavor profile comes from the natural things that kind of are involved in the development of flavor. So 100% of the color comes from the barrel, and about 80% of the flavor comes from the barrel as well. So it really is like a very natural kind of integrated and fluid kind of fluid product in terms of the flavor profile. So when the whiskey sits inside the barrels, and the barrels are virgin, so they're first fill, they're charred, which means they're kind of flame charred on the inside, and they're made of white oak, which means they have a high proportion of vanilla and coconut flavor profiles. The whiskey sits inside and it expands into the barrel and soaks up all of this beautiful, beautiful wood sugars and pulls it back into the liquid. And so it's this kind of rapid, in the hot kind of Kentucky temperatures particularly, this expansion and contraction of flavor that soaks up all of this wonderful wood sugars and then pulls it into the liquid. The other day, someone asked me what, Old Forester, what bourbon new make tastes like. And to be honest with you, it's quite like, I don't know if you've ever tried it before, but it's quite green, quite doughy. I think it has like a whole kind of pizza dough, kind of green cachaça tequila kind of vibe. It's very kind of crisp. And then when you add the barrels to it, you get this really incredible vanilla coconut kind of vibe. And that comes from one of the main kind of flavor profile congeners that's called vanillin. Vanillin is the same stuff that's in oak, but it's also kind of all around us, naturally found in lots of different things. But ultimately, it all contributes to that flavor. And I think of alcohol as like distilled spirits, particularly as like a sponge and an amplifier in the same measure. So they kind of suck up all this flavor and then they kind of concentrate it and blast it out. Kind of it's really a concentration kind of process. Now, we couldn't, if you guys have a little taster, you couldn't get these caramelized flavors without adding heat, because otherwise it would be very astringent and very kind of bitter and very green and fresh. So by adding heat to the process, we're caramelizing these sugars and we're turning them into these really beautiful kind of rounded caramels. And that's really where the magic happens. I kind of think of a barrel as like a reverse tea bag, which I know sounds really, really unromantic, but it's a very British way of talking about it. But ultimately, if you put a tea bag in a glass of cold water or a glass of hot water, you'd get the same process. You get the same flavor profile at the end, but ultimately one would get there quicker than the other. Obviously, we're adding heat to the process, but ultimately this kind of cooked, caramelized, kind of round sugar flavor is really kind of driving that taste profile. And that's what we're getting kind of from the barrels and from the oak. There are other sugars in here as well. There's other flavor profiles. So there's all the wood fat, you know, kind of all the fats from the wood, like the lactones. These kind of stuff are. Oh, are these questions in the chat? Sorry, I can just see these coming up here.
But later, we'll go over them later. I'm just storing them there so we can go over them later.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, guys, distracted there. You know, there's other flavor profiles in there, and different. I'll talk in a bit more detail about where these flavor profiles come from. But ultimately, in the wood, there's these like kind of fatty notes that give you that really kind of unctuous coconut kind of vibe, those tropical flavors. And then when the wood sits outside, because we rest all of the wood outside for anywhere between 6 to 12 months, kind of sat outside the distillery and the cooperage, all of these kind of, you know, microfungus and kind of microorganisms are landing on the wood, and they're digesting and starting to break down all these kind of weird sugars, so and oils. So we get this less piney flavor, and we get more of this kind of unctuous, round, kind of like, you know, tropical fruit notes that come out. So I think like a underripe pineapple, I think, is a really big flavor profile from bourbon. I think working in a champagne bar, which is where I kind of came from, I feel really, really close to, I feel really comfortable expressing myself in terms of the flavor profiles. So no doubt I will come out with some really, really pretentious tasting notes in a bit, guys. So I hope you're going to join me on that, because I'd like for you guys to give me some as well. Anyway, so barrels are fundamental to the flavor profile. They're fundamental to the flavor, and also to the development. Otherwise, you know, we would just keep it in stainless steel, right? You know, ultimately it's better to keep it in wood because it gives us that flavor. I don't know if you guys know, because I think often people assume that blended products are kind of poor quality, but ultimately most bourbons are blends. Okay, so there'll be again, similar to champagne, right? So, you know, champagnes, like things like Merc, Chandon, Veuve Clicquot, they come as non-vintage, which means they're kind of a blend of different years together to make the same product year on year. Likewise with you know, kind of most bourbons, you know, minimum age 4 years, but ultimately might have a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old in there. And these are like salt and pepper. It's like kind of balancing the product and making sure that we can make the same product year on year on year. So whether or not you're in Whitefield or, you know, or New York, you know, the glamorous Whitefield, you know, it's going to taste the same if you're New York, Whitefield, you know, Osaka or London, you know, wherever you are. It's really important to kind of have that consistency. And we could only do that by having really big libraries of barrels of whiskey. So at Old Forester, we have 5 warehouses that we kind of use to blend these products together, which we'll get into more detail when we talk through some of the Whiskey Row series just behind me there. Well, that's really well spaced there, actually, isn't it? So, awesome. Okay, so next up is corn. Okay, we couldn't talk about bourbon without talking about corn. In reality, we probably should say maize. Otherwise, you know, I'm saying corn because A, B, and C. In reality, maize is the kind of the correct term to use. But ultimately, maize is America's native grain. So, you know, they think it comes from Central America. I was actually, I went to Mexico a while ago, and we went to a corn museum, and they had 40 different types of corn like to try, and different types of tacos and taco shells and stuff at this corn museum, which sounds incredibly boring. I had a great time. My girlfriend had the worst time ever. But ultimately, You know, it was about me, not her. So I was also really, really poorly. So I think I was poorly for like 8 days of this 10-day holiday. And then we went and tried this. We tried all these corn shells. Anyway, bourbon has to be minimum 51% corn. And that's because it's America's native grain. So it's really, really fundamental to the development and the production process. Now, corn doesn't give you much flavor. It gives you some flavor, but it's not like it's not a big kind of punch in the face flavor. Corn is all about the, it's all about those kind of, I think, the subtle kind of caramel notes that you get when you have bourbon, obviously bolstered by and accentuated by oak. I think it also gives you like a classic popcorn nose, you know, that kind of caramel popcorn. Also as well, I think you get quite a lot of like almost like cooked apple on there as well with corn. That's what I think anyway. What do you guys get from corn?
Yeah, I kind of associate it with the kind of buttery vanilla, that kind of thing. Generally, the creaminess, I guess.
Yeah. A little slight turn, like almost like a not off milk, but like that kind of soured milk, you know, that kind of slightly soured milk. I totally get that for sure. But yeah, corn is absolutely, you know, instrumental to the development of to bourbon's production. Now, obviously, like I said, it's one of America's native grains. Okay, it was feeding the First Nation Americans before the Europeans got there, but ultimately, when the Europeans got there and they kind of started making their way, kind of landing on the eastern seaboard, I'm going to throw my arms around a lot. When they landed on the eastern seaboard and made their way down the country, they kind of encountered more and more corn, and they realized that it had a really high production yield, and it meant that, you know, if you've got a lot of carbohydrates, it means you've got a lot of food, and if you've got some excess, you can make some whiskey on the side. So it became really the kind of the way that everyone kind of, you know, farmed. You know, a lot of people in the southern states switched over to using corn, and that was driven obviously by things like the corn writ, which was basically the American government said that, you know, if you planted corn in, you know, kind of an area to feed the nation, they would, you know, help fund building a cabin on the land, which is obviously really important, especially with a growing nation like, you know, kind of the new American people as they were kind of growing the new American nation. We don't just use corn, okay? So we also use rye, and we use barley, malted barley. So in Old Forester, we use 72% corn, we use 18% rye, and we use 10% malted barley. We would say rye is like a flavor grain, so it's all that spice. So you know when you get that really kind of incredible kind of cinnamon kind of vibe that comes off, you know, off bourbon, we would say that's really kind of predominantly coming from rye.
Nate, just to jump in, like one of the things that amazed me when I heard Jackie speak was obviously all of the OF expressions are all the same mash bill. So yeah. 1910, 1920, the standard, signature, but it's all from the same mash bill. So yeah. The only thing that is changing is barrels, warehouse,
absolutely,
that kind of
and
stuff.
This is, yeah, and so also as well, not just that, it's also not just the same mash bill, but it's also the same fermentation process as well. So anywhere between 5 to 7 days for Old Forester, but it's all about developing loads and loads of flavor, and then the barrels, like I said earlier, are the most important part of the whole process. They really develop this whole kind of they finish off that kind of speciality, you know, that kind of the individual products. But that is not uncommon in bourbon as a category.
Is it the same? Is it the? Sorry to interrupt. Is it also the same mash bill as Woodford Reserve?
It is, yeah. Yeah, so if you guys have a glass of Woodford Reserve in front of you and you have a glass of Old Forester in front of you, you know, hashtag please drink responsibly, but ultimately, you know, have a taste of each of them and see what you think. And ultimately, yes, with Woodford that you have pot still and column, and Old Forester is exclusively column still, but ultimately the barrel is the really big defining factor in here. So, you know, if we are tasting Old Forester, it's, you know, medium char, kind of generally like, you know, a nice easygoing kind of crowd pleasing bourbon that, you know, we like to think that would work well as a Boilermaker or a shot. or mixed with a cocktail, you know, kind of sipped over ice, no problem. With Woodford, there's a lot more texture and body and density there, and that comes from not only the pot still, but also the older barrel. It's generally a bit older, so really the barrel is so critical to making these different expressions of whiskey. So the 1897, which is 50 ABV, unfiltered, comes from it comes from specific barrels in the barrel warehouse that are kind of we're pulling together to make this kind of punchy, original kind of like bottled in bond kind of flavor profile. Does that kind of make sense? Awesome.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think what's really interesting is how it all starts off so similar, but yeah, how different, you know, the range tastes, the different bottles in a range. I think it's crazy, to be honest.
Oh, dude, it really is mental. Like, you know, I think, and this is not to debunk any of the, you know, kind of, and to devalue any of it by any means, but ultimately we get so caught up in the stories. But in reality, often, you know, across a lot of the bourbon distilleries, it's a relatively similar mash bill, you know, if not the same for some people, but they're producing 10, 20, 30, 40 bourbons. You know, in the UK, how many do we have? Like maybe 500 different brands of bourbon. Most of them, I would say, probably coming out of 14 big bourbon houses, big bourbon distilleries, probably. You know, so they're using the same stuff, but they're flexing this barrel capability. You know, and the barrels are so fundamental. I didn't want to get into bourbon barrel chat today, actually, but ultimately the barrels are so important to the development of the flavor profile. You know, even more so than corn and grain, to be honest, because the grain really is like the carrier for the flavor of the barrel, and without the barrels you wouldn't be able to kind of like pull out, you wouldn't be able to kind of, there'd be nowhere to, without the barrels there's no flavor to come into the liquid. So off the still, I don't know if you guys know, but well, I'm sure you guys know, but ultimately off the still whiskey doesn't come like this, it comes crystal clear, you know, like water. And it's not until, you know, kind of, I like to think of it as a happy accident, really, but ultimately it wasn't until that whiskey was put into a barrel that they realized, actually this makes it taste way better. You know, it doesn't feel like my face is melting. I actually quite enjoy the taste profile of this kind of nice, delicious, yeah, kind of vanilla profile coming out of the barrels. And I think another thing to think about as well is that barrels have been unchanged for about 2,500 years. You know, they were using barrels in Roman times, you know, when they were kind of moving up through from Italy kind of into where the Gallic tribes were. You know, the Gauls apparently they used barrels to keep their beer kind of sealed, and the Romans were using clay amphoras, and they saw that these barrels were really handy because they kept it kind of completely sealed, but also as well you could get your slaves to push them behind your armies, so you had beer that could follow your armies relatively easily. Whereas the clay amphoras, I think, were quite heavy and brittle. So yeah, so it's crazy to think that it's, you know, 2,500 years on, and we're still using the same kind of concept.
And yeah. you guys have your own cooperage, which is for Old Forester and Woodford, yeah, and Jack Daniels, or
so we have two cooperages. We have one that services just for Jack Daniels, and then we have one that does for all of the other Brown-Forman brands. So, for example, it was called the Bluegrass Cooperage, but now it's called the Brown-Forman Cooperage, imaginative named. It's kind of near the airport. So if you guys ever go out there, it's just kind of near the airport in Louisville. But ultimately, they make barrels there for Old Forester, Woodford, specialist Jack Daniels barrels. So if you kind of Gold 27? I believe that's one of the barrels that are made there. The Maplewood barrels are made there. Cooper's Craft barrels, which is a brand you only get in the US at the moment, and El Jimador, and some of the wine brands that Brown-Forman have as well, and Herradura. So tequila, wine barrels are all made there. But so when I first started working for Brown-Forman, there wasn't actually an official tour. So you just got kind of, you went to the cooperage and you kind of got taken around, you know, with one of the coopers, and it kind of, I think it was a guy called Chad, I don't know if he's still there now, but he was just like, stick these earplugs in, stick these glasses on, and we'll take you around and you know, literally don't touch anything, only walk on this line that goes through this factory effectively. But now they have a more organized tour. I'm not sure how easy it is to get on, but ultimately it kind of highlights the importance of the cooperage and the barrels into American whiskey flavor, bourbon flavor profile, and American whiskey flavor profiles. And I think Brown-Forman purchased that in the 50s. No, it was, yeah, they purchased it in the 50s, but before that it was making furniture, and I think rifle butts in the World Wars sometime, I think. But ultimately, either way, they've had it for a long time. It means that we're in charge of that, that ingredient. For us, a barrel isn't just a taste profile. You know, it's not just a holding vessel. Sorry, it is actually an ingredient. So it is really important to the development of the product. Yeah.
And somebody's just asked the question actually, which I haven't thought about, which I should have done actually.
Yeah, I've been working on. Sorry.
Do they only have how many yeast strains are they using, or is it just one yeast strain across the range?
It's just one yeast strain. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay, cool, amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Right. So you know, and again, I think that's what's just so so kind of crazy about it, is that all of these different expressions come from this one yeast strain with different kind of barreling finishes effectively, which I think is pretty cool. Awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah, I was kind of, obviously I'm kind of so used to doing these live where it's like, oh, isn't that cool? And everyone's like, oh yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool, Nate.
Thanks, guys. Cheers, guys. Cheers. Lovely stuff. Awesome. So yeah, so really good way to think about bourbon is A, B, and C. America, barrels, and corn. Okay, really, we can't make it any easier than that, really. But they're all equally important. So in terms of kind of, I haven't actually got any here today, but rye whiskey. Obviously, I know you guys love a rye. But probably rye whiskey was probably one of the most probably one of the first whiskeys in America. I would say, and that's because it was brought over with the Europeans. Corn was not native to Europe, so they would bring over and distill what they had with them. So I would think rye and barley whiskies were probably up there at the start. Like I said, as they moved down the country, they kind of encountered these kind of corn, kind of corn heavier kind of states and stuff. Obviously, it would have just been the country underneath them, but ultimately it just meant that you just made whiskey of what was local to you, and I think that's kind of really why bourbon had a bit of a slow start compared to rye, because rye was really consumed on the eastern seaboard because it was made in Pennsylvania, Maine, Massachusetts, and the river systems all fed that eastern seaboard. And really, bourbon was consumed mostly in the south, in New Orleans, Massachusetts, and locally in Kentucky and Tennessee, and that kind of area. So corn whiskey really took a bit of a time to kind of get there. I think I can't remember what it was, but in the 1800s there was like a census, and it was something like 3 million gallons of rye whiskey were made, and like half of that of corn whiskey from Kentucky. So it was really, really like a small fry. Whereas now we think of corn whiskey or bourbon as being the kind of the star of the show, really, because it's kind of flipped on its head. Rye whiskey is really, really tiny. But yeah, really that's been driven by Kentucky. I guess kind of being like the gateway to the south, and kind of like being on that river system, coming down from the kind of the Monongahela and coming down in the Ohio River that leads down to the Mississippi, and or it would have passed via Kentucky, and they would have loaded all the whiskey onto the flatboats from and it would have ended up in New Orleans. And the only way to transport products back then was by barrel, right? So it kind of made sense to put whiskey in a barrel, because that was the only way that you could seal it. And you put it in like this, and it came out like this. It kind of went in clear, came out brown. And when it ended up down in kind of in New Orleans, people said, oh, can I get that whiskey from Kentucky? And they're like, oh, where from? From Bourbon County. And I kind of feel that's not the only naming kind of story, because there's quite a few of them, but I think that's probably the most one of the most valid in terms of they would have asked for whiskey from Bourbon County, and it eventually would have got stuck as that, in my humble opinion, of course. I'm just an English guy talking to English people about American whiskey, so that's how I'm doing it. From reading lots of different books around the world. Should we go for some questions? Is that probably?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I mean, we've had a. Go on, Nate.
No, I was going to say, are there any generic questions? I love your T-shirt, by the way, Chris.
Tell you what might be interesting, like just a quick overview of Old Forester, like Brown-Forman, who owns it, what the family, and then your master distiller Chris and Jackie and the role. Just a very quick overview of how it works, basically. That might be
for sure. Okay, no problem. So Old Forester is distilled by Chris Morris. The master taster is Jackie Saikan. We'll go into those guys in more detail in a sec. But obviously the parent company that own Old Forester is called Brown-Forman. So they were established in 1870. And that's when Old Forester started. So we are 150 years old this year. We're still family owned, which is really amazing. And we were the first bottled bourbon in 1870. I'll get into that in a second. But also we're the only bourbon that you can get before, during, and after Prohibition, made by the same family to this day. So that's like, it's a humble brag, but ultimately it is it's one of those. But it's a really big thing. Brown-Forman, if anyone doesn't know, also own Jack Daniels and Woodford Reserve, Chambord, Finlandia, El Jimador Tequila, Herradura Tequila, some cool tasty wine brands that we don't get over here, unfortunately. But yeah, they're a pretty big company, but they are still family owned, and I think that's kind of a really special position to be in. There's not many of those kind of companies around anymore. So it just kind of means that, if I go to the London office, and actually I was actually in the London office about 2 weeks ago, and I don't know if you guys saw, but on there was a whiskey auction, and there was a bottle of Old Forester from 1943, and I saw it, and I sent the link to my betters, and it eventually ended up that I think Brown-Forman had actually purchased it because they wanted to kind of keep it for their collection and their kind of family. And I think I went into the office in London, and Garvin, who is one of the family, Garvin Brown, one of the family there, he said, you want to show me, and I was just blown away by just how much pride he had in having this bottle from 1943 in his hands. It was really incredible. It was pretty badass. So for those who don't know, Brown-Forman was started by a guy called George Garvin Brown the first, and he was a pharmaceutical salesman. And he'd seen a gap in the market for safe whiskey for doctors to prescribe, because in the 1800s, there was a lot of counterfeit whiskey on the market, which was causing people to die regularly. And they didn't know as much about the body as perhaps we would know now. And so when doctors were prescribing whiskey for people to drink, prescribing whiskey for medicine, people were just obviously falling over in the streets and dying. And that's because you couldn't trust where you bought your whiskey from. So you go to your general store or your barber or your church, wherever you got your whiskey from, and you'd buy by the measure. So you'd fill up your own little barrel or your own little jug. But like I say, you couldn't trust who had made the whiskey or who had bought the barrel. Maybe they'd kind of run down half full, topped up with water, so it obviously wasn't strong enough. But to fake that flavor, they might add in some chemicals in there, different types of dangerous chemicals like copper sulfate, different types of acids, all this kind of stuff. If they wanted to fake the color, I read a story the other day that was talking about they would put in tobacco spittoons, which would give you that nice foamy texture. Just imagine that. I mean, that's not even the worst bit really, but I think one story was saying that rattlesnake heads in there, to kind of fake that, to kind of simulate that kind of euphoric state of death you get when you've got a really good hangover, I guess. We've all been there, right? But ultimately, he saw a gap in the market for safe whiskey to prescribe. So he said that using commercially available glass, which is like a whole new kind of crazy new world, he kind of produced the first bottle bourbon. Okay, it was hand sealed at the time, hand signed, and there's like a little kind of a little tip of the hat down here that says, "This whiskey is distilled by us only, and we are responsible for its richness and fine quality. Its elegant flavour is solely due to the original finesse developed with care. There is nothing better on the market." You know, George Garvin Brown, the founder. So that was in 1870. We're now, I believe, you know, no doubt someone from Brown was watching, they'll correct me, but ultimately it's, you know, 6 generations later, and I think it's the 4th George Garvin Brown who I was talking about, that works in the London office. So, you know, you're very much in kind of contact with these people that are kind of so devoted to their kind of family heritage. And incidentally, Campbell Brown, who's Garvin's older brother, is the company president for Forrester. So, you know, it has a good custodian as well. I've completely gone off topic and way off track. Either way, what are we talking about?
It's quite amazing though, because I can't. Obviously, a lot of bourbons have these stories, but I can't think of another. I'm probably wrong. Off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of another family that's still involved in
Heaven Hill, Shapiro's.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Watson. Yeah, that's still pretty amazing though. Since 1870 to still have the same family involved, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the Shapiro's weren't until World War II, right? Is that right? They started as clothing. They started clothing with general store. Then they moved into bourbon, I think. So I'm not poo-pooing anybody's, like, you know, kind of heritage or anything like that. But I think, well, as far as I understand, 150 years, still family owned. It's the only bourbon made before, during, and after Prohibition by the same family today. You know, and that's, I believe that's a, you know, an official line. You know, so I think I can use that safely. But ultimately, you know, there were brands absolutely that you can get today that were available before Prohibition. Absolutely. I think Four Roses was one of them. You know, we're in a unique position to say that we still have that credential and that credibility. So I'm really, you know, it's something I've definitely kind of like fell head over heels in love with, all the story of Brown-Forman, having worked with them for so long, even working on with Woodford before working on Forrester. You know, they're so into the heritage. You know, I won't kind of wax lyrical on Woodford too much, because I'll let Charlotte do that with you guys another time. But ultimately, like, you know, when they go into stuff, they go into it so deep and so hard. And I think there was, it's funny, we're saying 150 years now, but when they did their 70, like when they did their 70 years or 75 years anniversary, they got a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist to chronicle the history of the family. And I remember reading through it. He produced a book, and it's called "There's Nothing Better on the Market." I'll send it out to anyone if they want on a PDF. I think I'm allowed to. Maybe I'm not allowed to, but oh well. Never mind, I just said it. So, but ultimately, one of the things they're saying there is that, you know, weather the storm, and, you know, kind of like, you know, we'll basically pace it, and it's always about family and about kind of heritage and sticking to your guns ultimately. You know, and that's where they are today. They've really kind of done that, and they've really managed to kind of produce and continually produce these exceptional bourbons, research the heritage, and, you know, kind of embrace the heritage and that kind of you know, where they basically started, which I think is incredible. Cool. Anyway, questions?
Yeah, I mean, I wondered if we could do two things. I mean, I've got a load of questions which we'll put up as well, but maybe we can talk as well briefly at some point about the difference between the bottles in the range. I mean, I know you've got a couple of bottles behind you there. I don't know if you want to say anything about those.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and indeed, I mean, we're all armed to the teeth with Old Forester tonight as well. So, you know, we're joining in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I know that. So you guys are big fans of 1920 and 1910 when you guys get your hands on it. That stuff is so hard to get hold of, even for me, guys. Like, I don't even have a bottle in the house. And actually, the 1910, the only time I've tried it was a bottle of Ed's, actually. So, thank you, Ed. Where are you? There. Oh, he's not there anymore. Yeah, a bottle of it that I got to try was Ed's. But ultimately, you know, that the stuff that we get over here is all imported via people like Native Spirits and Hedonism Wines and stuff like this. Like officially in the UK, the only bottles you have are 86 proof and Statesman, which I didn't bring upstairs with me. I'm going to text my girlfriend now and get her to run me a bottle up. So let's see if she does it. But ultimately, these are the only 2 brands that we have in the UK. So the other ones, that you might see are 1897 and 1870, and the single barrel, sorry, which is the only other one available over here. Okay, let me text my partner, see if she'll run me up a bottle of Statesman. She probably won't, but let me just give it a go.
I've got one. If you want me to bring it down.
Yeah, cheers, Chris. Can you run me over one from over the road?
Yeah, I mean that kind of links into one of the questions actually, which we've been asked, or maybe a few of the questions actually. So we had Justin Adams say, "Hey Nate, when will the full Old Forester range be available in the UK?" And we also had Mark Latimore ask, "Why don't we see Birthday Bourbon or King of Kentucky in the UK?"
Okay, so in that regard, Old Forester is still relatively, rather than saying small, let's say humble, but ultimately it's a relatively kind of like, it's only been in the UK for about 6 years, but it's still a relatively small portion of the UK market. Obviously things like Woodford are absolutely flying, but Old Forester is kind of like it's meant to be the kind of like that starting point for people to get on their bourbon journey. And so we're really trying to kind of like work with 86 proof first and make sure that people understand that and kind of can start there and then work their way around the rest of the range that we have. I don't think I'm legally allowed to say if and when the other stuff will come out. There will definitely be some 1870 in the country this year because it's our 150th anniversary this year. But will we bring it over officially? I wouldn't say for now just yet. I wouldn't say yes just for now. We're really just focusing on 86 proof and Statesman. That's not to say it won't ever come over. It's just that you guys need to help me drink even more 86 proof so I can justify bringing the rest over. To be honest with you, I'd rather bring over the rye. Before I brought over the Whiskey Row, I'd rather bring over the rye, if I'm honest. So no doubt Colton's watching this and I'm going to get in loads of trouble. He's the global brand director for Old Forester. But the rye, I think, would be a really great addition to the 86 proof because it's absolutely stonking. And it will be such a good price point. It'll be such a good kind of like entry to the rye category. Anyway, I digress. Soon-ish, maybe. Who knows?
Thank you, Nate. Yeah. I mean, I guess we'll just all hold out hope for now, and when it turns out, we'll buy it.
Yeah, I wish I could like tell you guys exactly when it's going to come over, but I think the team at Hedonist and I think Native Spirits and 23 Wine and Whiskey, those guys get kind of parcels of it sent over every now and again. I have no idea where they get that from. So, they are doing that off their own back. So props to them because, it's not an official, we're not officially talking about it. So when you guys, when every time it comes up on the feed in the Facebook group, I'm always like, where did that come from? I wish I knew because I want to buy some. And every time I go to buy some, you guys have already bought it all already. So
yeah, it goes quickly, doesn't it? When we see it. I guess another slightly similar question, which Andy Mantell asked, when will we get some more of the 90 proof single barrel picks in the UK? I mean, is there a possibility of the British Bourbon Society single barrel pick? I guess is the obvious question to that.
Okay, so the single barrel program has changed slightly since we released this 90 proof. So there are going to be 2 levels. As I understand, I don't know when they're coming out, so please don't hold me to any of these kind of dates. I'm not going to say any dates. I'm just going to try not to say any dates. But ultimately, yes, absolutely. A British Bourbon Society will. I think if anything, you guys will be on the top of our list for a barrel pick. There are 2 styles. There's a 50 proof, okay, which you would have probably seen on Jackie's social or Old Forester's social. So we're not doing the 45 proof anymore. We're doing a 50 proof, and we're doing a barrel strength.
That sounds very interesting, Nate.
I know.
Take the barrel strength, please.
Yeah, barrel strength, please.
I know. So we're gonna have to buy 2, boys. So because ultimately, when you get a barrel strength, you get less whiskey, right? So it is going to be the proverbial rocking horse shit, really, in terms of kind of the amount we can actually get over here. But I think what we'll do is we'll facilitate that through chatting with you guys after the occasion. And if you guys are into it, then let's give it a go. So I don't know if you guys know, but ultimately the Brown-Forman office has just been kind of furbished, and it's now this beautiful new space down in Fitzrover in London. I kind of described it the other day as, the Google of whiskey. It's kind of like, the majority of it is like this huge breakout space where you can just kind of sit and drink whiskey. So I did a whiskey training session there for some bartenders down in London. It was like a 4-hour session that I did, like a really in-depth kind of one-on-one. Well, I think it was 4 of us, so 1-on-4 bourbon masterclass. And it's this really beautiful, incredible space. So what we were saying is that the process would probably be, we'd get a few of you guys down. We'll have a couple of drinks, and then we'll sit down and we'll taste the whiskeys through with Jackie probably via Skype, because ultimately she's quite busy, and she also lives on the other side of the globe. And then we'll kind of talk through the whiskeys with her, kind of online, and with Colton. And then obviously, I'll be there, and we can kind of taste the whiskeys together, which is pretty cool. As to when that is, bear with me,
mate. Sounds good.
I wish
sign us up.
More details, guys. Oh my god.
No.
I haven't even tried I have tried whiskey. I have tried Old Forester from the barrel before, and it was, it was quite a, when you have those kind of rapture moments where you're just kind of like, oh my god, this is, I feel so close to the creator right now. This is kind of like, so I literally was close to the creator. I was with Jackie, but ultimately I was with I think a couple of bartenders, and it was me, Jackie, these bartenders, and we had 4 barrels in front of us, and we were in one of the warehouses in where the main distillery is, because we have a distillery on Whiskey Row, which I'll talk about in a second. But ultimately, before that got built in this old place, or the older kind of bigger facility, and they'd put in this kind of copper, the kind of copper dog, big long, kind of like a giant metal pipette. I don't know what it's called. Is it called a copper dog? No, the copper dog is the one that you dip in, isn't it? But either way,
The whiskey thief.
A whiskey thief, yeah, basically like a giant whiskey thief, like a massive, huge pipette. Jackie put it in, and each one of those was like, it basically filled half a decanter. And so we were drinking this like barrel strength Old Forester, in the blistering heat inside this kind of like darkened room. I think I just went into another level of existence and was just like having a great time. I don't remember, apart from that, I don't remember any of it. They picked,
Oh, nice.
they had a wonderful time, but ultimately the whiskey was delicious.
When you say creator, do you mean God or George Garvin?
both, yeah. It's interesting because I think that, and again, banging on about the barrels again. One thing Jackie said, and Ed and Chris, I think you both would have noticed this when Jackie was over, was that, she said that she loves short yield barrels that kind of deliver these really unusual taste profiles. So she was like, if someone comes to her on a single barrel program, they're like, I want a barrel that tastes like Dr. Pepper, or I want a barrel that tastes like bubblegum, or, I want a barrel that tastes like, dry fried cinnamon. She's got these barrels in her mind and in her inventory. So I think from what she said to us, she samples, I shouldn't say tastes, it makes it sound like she's drinking, but ultimately she samples from around about 300 barrels on a shift. She's also an ex-bartender, so she does her own kind of like advocacy and drinks focus programs. But ultimately she tries these barrels, and she kind of puts them into these categories, and she works with a lot of these she kind of enjoys these really unusual kind of chewy, bizarre flavor profiles. So one thing I get from single barrel is kind of like a really big hit of that kind of cherry kernel vanilla vibe, anyway. But that's it just I think it just shows kind of how unique the barrel process is. Delivery from my partner, Father Statesman. Thanks, Bex. Cheers. She would have had to get all the way into the cellar for that. Anyway, I digress. But ultimately, we have these 5 warehouses that are heat cycled, so we try and minimize those differences in flavor profiles. But ultimately, we do get these hot spots, which is kind of where things like the single barrel kind of come from. So if you guys kind of got involved on the single barrel program, your barrel would probably come from one of the hottest parts of the warehouse, which produces these really kind of in-depth and punchy flavor profiles.
And Statesman is from the hottest areas, isn't it?
It is, yes. So Statesman, so to a degree, Jackie described it as kind of whiskey with a window seat. It's kind of bourbon that kind of, the barrels that are kind of beaten down from the outside by the sun. It kind of, I guess, think about like a tea bag from a reverse tea bag, so it's from the outside in, really. But ultimately, it's the whiskey that might not have made it, might not have gotten onto the single barrel program, but ultimately it needed using into kind of making something really unique and really wonderful, and that's where kind of Statesman kind of comes into it. It's a blend of these kind of really unique and punchy barrels that Jackie's hand selected to put into Statesman.
I've got a question about Statesman. Obviously it's featured prominently in a movie. Was it the Kingsman film? What came first, the whiskey or the movie? How was that shoot? How did that happen? That collaboration?
I'm not high up enough on the food chain to know that, but the story goes, and we're not short of a marketing department, that's for sure. So the story goes is that one of the Brown family met Matthew Vaughn. Is it Matthew Vaughn? Yeah, Matthew Vaughn, the director. Yeah. At some sort of soiree, and he was explaining the story of his story that he'd written, and one of the Brown family was like, well, that is literally Whiskey Distillers on Whiskey Row. That is literally the story of the Brown family. That is how we started. That's our jam. So we should probably work together on this, on kind of making that thing come to life. And I think that we're really lucky that I think sometimes with tie-ins, it can go really badly. For us, this went really, really well. But it was really bolstered by the fact that this whiskey is absolutely stonking delicious. So the spoiler alert for those that haven't seen the movie, so turn me on mute now. But ultimately, in the Kingsman movie, they're tailors on Savile Row. And they're the super secret British service. In the American movie, in the Kingsman Golden Circle, they're whiskey distillers on Whiskey Row, and that's their cover for being the super secret American service. Now, Old Forester, Brown Foreman, started in the 1870s on a road called Whiskey Row, which is basically the road that led down to the river where all of the whiskey warehouses were. There was about 80 plus different distillers and producers on one street, and that's where the Brown Foreman office was. In 2015, I was just started working for Woodford, and we were flying into Kentucky, and this lady was on the plane next to me. She was like, "Oh my God, Whiskey Row's on fire!" And so we all kind of like leant out of the window. And we were like, "Oh, there was this plume of smoke coming out from the center of Kentucky." We were like, "Oh, wouldn't it be, obviously this was, it wouldn't be funny, but ultimately, wouldn't it be funny if that was whiskey, if that was the, where the new distillery was going to be?" Ultimately, it was literally next door to the distillery. It was like a clothes shop, I think, next door that had caught fire somehow. But that had pushed our opening of the new distillery back quite far. By a few years. Yeah, unfortunate, but it did happen. But we then in 2018 we opened the new distillery in the same place that we had our office in 1870. which is again unprecedented. It's it's really incredible that we have that original space. So for anyone that follows me on Facebook, you'll see we actually reshared it today because it's 27th today, wasn't it? So last year I was with a load of bartenders picking this bottle, single barrel last year, and we were actually in the office that was like kind of a finance office in the kind of in the late 1800s, 1900s. And we were actually in that exact same space again to pick this single barrel whiskey, which is now called Jackie's office. I think she kind of where she does all her single barrel tastings. So again, to kind of like bring it full circle, it was really, it was pretty cool. And actually, when the distillery opened in 2018, I was lucky enough I was there on a Woodford trip, and we'd been to Brooklyn Bar Show with some bartenders. And I got invited along to the opening on that week, the friends and family opening. I don't think they knew who they were inviting, but ultimately there was Campbell, Chris, and Jackie. And then where the distillery sits on Whiskey Row, just outside, there's like a bar, and on the side of all of the buildings, and you guys have probably seen that, you have all these kind of famous Kentuckians on the side of the building. So you got Jennifer Lawrence is on there, the Colonel, he's on there, but actually outside the Old Forester distillery is George Garvin Brown the First. So I could see Campbell, Chris, Jackie, and then George Garvin Brown the First through this window. It was pretty special. Anyway, I just feel like I'm just talking about myself. It's kind of like, I feel this is.
Mate, that's what you're here to do. That's
yeah.
I feel like pretty indulging myself really, but
I can quickly show those pictures actually, Nate. I think.
Wait, what pictures are these? What? No, hang on. What?
Yeah, these are the. Is everybody seeing them? So that's the picture you guys took when you went.
Yeah.
And then this here is the original picture in the same office.
Yeah,
which that's really cool. Yeah, to have been able to recreate that.
Obviously, it's had a bit of work, but ultimately, it was such an amazing kind of experience to be there. And if you guys ever go, it's on Whiskey Row. Unfortunately, it's closed at the moment, obviously due to the current crisis, which we won't dwell on. But ultimately, if you're ever in Kentucky, it's slap bang in the middle of, I feel like, in the middle of downtown Louisville. So there's a few places on the strip as well. So you've got on the same strip, you've got Evan Williams are on there, and the visitor centre, and then at the other end where we are, completely opposite side, you've got Michter's, and they've got a new distillery visitor centre there as well. But we're the only kind of full-on big distillery, I think, on that street. Or well, we were the first big distillery back on that street, which is a pretty big thing. Go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, after you, man. After you. I'm just wittering. So.
Yeah, sorry. We just if we have any more questions, there's a couple more questions, and I wondered if we could tie a couple in about the range, which are two people asked two separate questions, but I think could end up being quite similar. Which is one is if there's an Old Forester bottling not available in the UK, which would you recommend? And also, what is your favourite Old Forester? So I don't know whether that could be something that is on the shelves here or not.
Maybe just on that note, could you like run through 1870, 1890, 1910?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, of course.
What's the difference? And what's your favourite version of it?
Okay, so I only have two of the Whiskey Row series. So 1870, which is this guy here, is in principle is meant to represent and be inspired by the taste profile that George Garvin Brown would have blended when they first started blending whiskey together. When they first started blending bourbons together, to make the Old Forester brand. So the three distilleries were Mattingly, Atherton, and Melwood. Now, obviously, those distilleries don't exist anymore, but what we've done is we've used kind of like specific parts of the warehousing program to kind of develop these kind of rich, in-depth flavors. So it's going to give you a lot more mouthfeel, a lot more kind of in-depth, I think, like almost like a borderline kind of cinnamon ball-esque kind of vibe. Hey, Ryan, how you doing? I can see that little message there. Yeah, and then we have the 1897, sorry, which is obviously bottled in bond, which was when bottled in bond act was the thing, became like a thing. I believe it was the first time the American government had got involved into the production of food and drink in America, and it was for booze. I mean, go figure. But ultimately, this is a 50 ABV development of the flavor profile. As far as I understand, from what Jackie was saying, you know, Brown-Forman and George Garvin Brown were like, well, you know, we already make great whiskey, and we sell it by the, you know, hand sealed, hand signed. That's groundbreaking, you know, by all accounts. It's not poisonous. You know, we know our whiskey's good. So when the bottle and bond act came in, I think they were kind of like, well, it means that the actual rest, that the other quality of all the bourbons kind of came up with it, which is a good thing for bourbon as a whole. But ultimately, I guess probably at the time, I imagine they were a bit like, well, you know, okay, fine, you know, we'll take it. But bottled in bond act was a great thing for bourbon as a whole. I believe. These days, I think it means. I think we get a bit caught up in it because it's probably the closest thing that bourbon has to single malt. So I don't think it means as much as it used to in terms of, you know, kind of guaranteeing quality and flavor profile. But ultimately, in 1897, that was all you had. So it had to really mean it. Next up, I don't have them, but we have the 1910. So 1910 represents a time in the Whiskey Row series and the distillery series when there was a fire on the in the warehousing and the bottling line, and basically it meant that the whiskey kind of got super heated from the outside, and it really changed the changed the flavor profile of Old Forester that was kept in those barrels. So, you know, like I said earlier, Brown-Forman and Old Forester like to stick to their guns, good on them. But ultimately, what they had in these barrels that were left over from this fire, it wasn't Old Forester. So they called it Old Fine Whiskey, and it was kind of almost like a family reserve. You know, it was kind of kept for the family and kept for gifting and all this kind of stuff. And it was really well regarded. I have never tried any from that period because this was in 1910, but ultimately, it had kind of been gifted. That it was no more. So to recreate that, kind of inspired by the history of 1910, they created like a double oaked. Chris has had enough. He's gone. He's out of here. But ultimately, the double, it's effectively an Old Forester double oaked, but it's a bit of a flip on what Brown-Forman and Woodford and Old Forester usually do. So this barrel is the highest. It is like some of the highest char that we do at Old Forester, but some of the lowest toasting. So for those who don't know, charring is like flame grill. It's very exciting. You know, think, you know, kind of licking your burgers on a barbecue with the flame, kind of making a nice charcoal effect on the outside. A toasting is like a low and slow bake. So I'd kind of describe that more as like a low and slow barbecue kind of esque aspect to it. So it's a deep penetrating heat that caramelizes the internal sugars of the wood and creates this really, really toffee-like, coffee-like flavor on the inside. Whereas I think the charring is more of a kind of a white sugar caramel crack, which to a degree. So either way, 1910, super high charring on the inside and lower toasting on the outside, on the main part of the barrel. So for those that have tried it, Ed, how would you describe it? Because it's been a while since I've tried it, but
it's amazing. It's my favorite OF whiskey. It is just amazing because it's super caramelly. It's super the charcoal in it is big. I'm drinking it right now, by the way.
Oh, nice, awesome. I'm having Statesman,
and I've still got some of the batch one stuff. It's just one of the most unique Kentucky whiskies I've ever tasted, and when I first tasted it, I was like, "Wow, this is unusual." And then now I just have a taste for it, and I can't stop drinking it. Really, it's amazing.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because we don't make. Well, I mean, we ran out of it. So, but ultimately, the first batch, and I think Emma said, you know, how does she tell if it's batch 1910 is batch 1 or 2? You would have to send me a picture, and I could ask Brown-Forman for you. But ultimately, I wouldn't know at the moment. But Emma, send me the picture and I'll let you know. But effectively what happened was, it was one of the later releases because they needed to, you can't force age these secondary barrels, these double oakings. So you have to wait. So if you haven't made enough, you've got to wait. And that's actually what happened. So we based the 1910 volume that we wanted to sell off, I believe it was off the 1920, and we actually sold the 1910 stock in something like 3 weeks, the entire year's supply in 3 weeks. So we had to kind of produce more and then barrel more, but then we had to wait 6 months for it to actually take on that flavor profile. So it really changed. It was so surprising that was kind of so popular, and I think they're obviously really proud of it, but also I think they were kind of like, hell, we should have made more in the first run. And in 1920 is going into the Prohibition era. For those that don't know, Prohibition era was 1920 to 1933. It was when basically in America it was illegal to make, sell, or distribute alcohol, other than there were 6 distilleries that were given licenses to make alcohol on medicinal grounds, which meant that you could make new whiskey, 1 day a year, but you could also buy up old whiskey and blend it together, so you could sell whiskey throughout that period. Hence why Old Forester you could get before, during, and after, because we actually still produced it continually through that time by blending old whiskies together. So things like Early Times was one whiskey that we brought up. We bought the stock of it to blend into Old Forester. So 1920 is unfiltered. I think it was 57.5 ABV. I haven't got a bottle here, so but yeah, got it, nailed it.
Nailed got a bottle there.
Yeah, it's a big whiskey, and a big expression of Old Forester. It's just so super punchy, really heavy cinnamon, kind of dry like cassia, kind of like cassia chippings almost. But it has loads of unctuous mouthfeel. But again, it's anywhere between I would say I think it's between 5 to just 7 years old. It's not an old whiskey, and I think that's the really incredible thing about bourbon, is that you get all of these flavors, but it's not old whiskey, which is really nice. We still lose a lot, obviously, to angel share, but ultimately it's not about that. It's not like where it has to sit and stew. It's like we get these big punches of flavor really quick. I'm just trying to see if I can see these questions here.
Yeah, just to go on there, I mean, Nate, what is your favourite? What if I guess you have stuff that you have access to that you can turn to, but then
you guys think that I've got like some sort of like tap I can turn on my house.
Well, what I was going to say there, I mean, I guess in terms of what we have in the UK, you have stuff that you have access to, but in terms of the whiskey row stuff, which you don't get to try that often because it isn't readily available even to you. What would you, if you could have anything right now in your glass out of the range, what would you be drinking?
So everyday stuff, everyday drinking, right? And I'm not saying drinking every day, of course. # please drink responsibly. But what I'm saying is that affordable, sharing with my friends. I know that we're all stuck in our own houses right now, but affordable, sharing with our friends. I think 86 is pretty good. It's a good all-rounder whiskey. Having done a lot of shots in my time, I think it's one of those whiskeys that I'm to kind of like enjoy as a nip as much as it is, in a cocktail. If I had to pick some of the kind of extreme kind of like the top end stuff that I get to try every now and again, and actually somebody did ask about birthday bourbon. Birthday bourbon is pretty delicious, but I honestly, guys, I'm not going to lie to you, I have a soft palate. I mean, I spent like 7 years of my bartending career drinking champagne, right? So for me, what can I say? I'm like such a champagne socialist. I've got, sorry, Chris, but I kind of feel that like I love strong booze, but at the same time, I would definitely water it down. And the birthday bourbons I've tried, I think I've tried like 4 or 5 of them. They are all big and punchy. I would probably go for something like the Statesman, where it's a bit more rounded, or the 45 ABV single barrel. was pretty exceptional. Actually, this is not the first one of these I've actually tried. I've tried a few of them. The first one I tried was from a bar in Louisville, and the bartender came over to Leeds, bizarrely, because for anyone who doesn't know, Leeds is twinned with Louisville. I don't know why, but
I did not know that.
I didn't know that either.
Did you guys know that Manchester is twinned with Wuhan? But anyway, let's crack on.
Manchester should be twinned with Louisville, I think. That would be
Well, yeah.
better. That would be
I'd
better.
take that, Ed, definitely.
Yeah, but marginally better than Wuhan, perhaps. But anyway, but yeah. So this bartender, he buys his own barrels all the time, and so I think his bar has the biggest collection of whiskies, of single barrel whiskies, definitely, in the southern states. Either way, he has loads and loads of different bottles. Anyway, I think he bought a couple of these in his luggage, and I bought one off him for 45 quid. And it tasted like blackcurrants and plums, and it was just absolutely delicious and so bizarre, and just didn't taste like any bourbon I'd tried before. And I think that's the benefit of single barrel programs, is you can get these really custom fit flavor profiles. Everyday drinking, 86 for sure, because, you know, at the end of the day, not made of money. You know, I like to have lots of friends around, like to make lots of drinks. But I think if I'm going for that kind of special thing, it's going to be a single barrel for me, potentially birthday bourbon, but you can never get it right. So I think I'm sure, because I'm not in charge of it. So I'm sorry, guys, I'm not in charge of bringing the birthday bourbon over. But ultimately, I'm sure someone said to me, we get like 6 bottles for the entire UK. And I think that's just for like the family, you know, just for the BF family guys.
We had a bottle of the birthday bourbon. I can't remember which year. It had an orange label. We had a bottle at a tasting we did in Whitefield, funnily enough, actually, Nate, last year, yeah. And at the craft house, yeah. And I remember that was absolutely delicious. I think they put it on the bar after the tasting, and people went back and nailed it within a few weeks, I think.
So there is actually an Old Forester family reserve or family stock. I can't remember what it's called now, but I've actually never tried it. So they have their own, you know, kind of bottling line inside the family that they kind of keep to themselves. I never tried it, but my friend Tom, he's the global ambassador for Woodford, he's got a couple. I know he's had a couple of bottles, but he's never. Even though we've known each other for a long time, Tom, if you're watching, give me some. But yeah, cool. Any more questions?
We don't have any more questions. I mean, there's another question asked before, which I guess maybe you can answer this one. So Andrew Lamarchand said he's asked, what do you think the sweet spot is for the age of bourbon? He seems to think people are reckoning 12 years is the optimum.
He says that. I mean, that is like that for me. Not he says that in terms of like that's ridiculous. But what I mean is, who's saying that? Because ultimately, I like bourbon at every age. You know, I like bourbon, you know, for like a mostly 4-year-old bourbon, or I like bourbon, you know, that's like birthday bourbon, which is at 12 years old. I think probably I'm gonna say anywhere between 6 to 8 years is probably going to be affordable and also taste really good. Anything older than that is probably going to get way more expensive. Not always, but yeah. I mean, the beauty part of blending barrels means that it doesn't necessarily matter about the age. And I think, and you know, working in the drinks industry for a long time, guests really get caught up on older is better. You know, and I don't necessarily think that's always the case. I think that if you've got a blend of whiskies, you know, or a blend of wines or whatever, you know, they can make a really exceptional, you know, delicious, consistent product. And I think sometimes that's more important than making these really unique, specific old aged whiskies or old aged wines. Is that a really terrible way to answer that question?
I think that's a great answer, and I would use this as an example, which I believe is a 4-year-old single barrel.
I am so surprised at the response from you guys on the 45-year-old Old Forester. Not because I don't think it was worth the credit, but because I know, looking through, you know, seeing long-time lurker, you know, kind of only recent time poster, you know, seeing you guys talk about the barrel strength whiskies. you know, you guys absolutely love that kind of super high ABV, you know, big punchy whiskies for good reason, because, you know, you guys, like me, have abused your palates. But ultimately, I was so happy with the response that you guys had to the 45 ABV whiskey, because just because it doesn't have a high ABV doesn't mean it's not going to have a lot of flavor, right? And if you look at things like Scotch whiskey, right, when people taste Scotch whiskey and they try these barrel proof super high ones, they're like, oh, add a couple of drops of water. Why? Because it opens it up. It kind of gives it more kind of scope to kind of you know, kind of walk in the rain and kind of wake up all these flavors that are kind of hidden around it. Yeah. So I
think that kind of stacks up with Old Forest, the range, in that what we've learnt tonight is they all start off the same, but there's so much variety in them, and it's just crazy. A lot of it, like you've already kind of touched on, really kind of goes against what we think is the norm in the industry. That, you know, we think there's all these little all these changes are what affects taste, and it does, but it just goes to show that what you guys are doing, even starting from the same, you know, the same building blocks, and you have such a different range of a lot of variety. And I just think that blows me.
Yeah, I think you're so right. Like it's not to say that there's not romance, you know, and there's not these, you know, beautiful stories of these, you know, these beautiful origin stories, you know, because we have been going, you know, Old Forester have been going 150 years, you know, still family owned. That is an incredible origin story, but they also produce one of the biggest whiskies in the world, right? So, you know, big isn't bad, but also as well, small isn't better, you know. And I think actually Chuck Cowdery, he wrote a little kind of small kind of piece about it. He said, yeah, small whiskey, I think it was something, small whiskeys make lousy whiskey, or something like that. Small barrels make lousy whiskey. But, you know, it's not necessarily about the you know, it's not about forcing this kind of craft aspect. It's about, it's I know I'm kind of don't want to sound bad, but it's about like embracing this, you know, this kind of having a huge library of whiskey to draw upon to make these really unique flavor profiles, you know, and to kind of really push one mash bill into, well, I mean, I've got 5 whiskeys sat here in front of me. There's another 2 that I don't have, and that's not including the 100 proof signature that isn't available in the UK. So, you know, that's 7 whiskeys, 8 whiskeys, you know, that from one mash bill, you know, and that's the power of the barrel, guys. It's really important, really, really important. And, you know, and it's not just us. This is not just us doing this. The other whiskey producers doing it, you know, Sazerac, they will definitely be doing, yes, they might have different mash bills, but also they will definitely be having same mash bill, different barrelings, you know, which will give you this kind of really crazy flavors. Like Rittenhouse and Pikesville, right? They're the same mash bill, but different barrelings. But yeah, obviously we know the price difference. So
yeah, I mean, I think Chris Clayton just put a very interesting comment, which I quite agree with. He's put the bartender pick is witchcraft, which I mean, I think that's, you know, it speaks volumes for like just how blown away we were by it for its age.
Yeah, I was really humbled by that. I mean, that's like, it was a really special opportunity to take these guys away. It was also absolutely savage. We flew in on one night. We landed. I think the flight was delayed, and I was like, we took them out. We stayed at 21C, which is a beautiful hotel that's like a museum as well, and a gallery. And so I took them out for dinner, and I was like, right, guys, so we can go out tonight. We'll stay at the hotel. We'll just drink loads of bourbon, but I need you to be up for 7 in the morning for breakfast, because we've got a tasting at 10 in the morning. But obviously I couldn't tell them what we were going to be doing. I wanted to keep it a surprise. And then so they had that tasting at 10 in the morning, 4 different single barrels, and the guys picked number 2 of that selection with a distillery tour. And then because we were in the room with Jackie, and like, you know, Jackie's a bartender, she's just this kind of incredible, like, larger than life character. She was just kind of totally riffing off them, and she was like, right, guys, okay, cool. We'll just like rummage around in the cupboard underneath the tasting table, and she had a bottle of, like, I think she had some barrel strength Old Forester hidden away in there somewhere. she had some rye, she had some other bits and bobs. So she was getting all this stuff out and just pouring out to the guys. And then that night, we then took them out until 4 in the morning, and then we literally stuck them on the plane the next day and took them home. We had some casualties, but everyone got home, everyone survived. So that's like, you know, that is that's the minimum I needed. As long as no one died, I was absolutely fine. So,
good. We're going to have to probably wrap it up in a minute, but
that's fine, man. No problem. That's cool. If anyone ever goes to Kentucky, I know obviously everything's kind of on lockdown now, but please get in touch, because I have a Google map full of all the bars that I think are the best bars in Louisville. There's a street called, obviously, one of the best bars in the whole world that I love going to is Tootsie's in Nashville. Outside of that, my other favorite, and is equally as kind of well placed, is the Garage Bar in Louisville, which is basically, it's an old garage that's now has ping pong tables outside that are basically ping pong tables on the front, on the bonnets of cars, and it's a pizza place. But if you go in the summer, it's like you could sit outside, drink loads of beer, loads of bourbon, just have a great time. And there's some moving art. It's owned by the same people that own the hotel. There's like this moving art piece that's kind of these two cars kind of moving forwards like this really, really slowly, and they kind of crash. But it's one of my favorite bars in the world. And then that's in the downtown area. You've got 3rd Street Dive, and then you've got Old Bardstown Road, which has all the kind of like the Irish bars and the gay bars, and like this roadhouse at the end called Backdoor, which is like nowhere you've ever been before. It's like people rocking up in their trucks. They get out, they go and see a couple of Bud Lights, and then they'll like eat loads of beige food, and then get out and drive off in the car again. It's like, it's so just amazing. We just don't get it over here. We just don't get that. We just don't get that thing over here. That style.
Yep. I absolutely love Louisville.
Don't drink and drive. # please drink responsibly.
Yeah.
And Nate, just big thanks, mate, because you are one of the biggest bourbon nerds in the UK. You have so much information about it. You love it, and you live, you breathe it. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
Honestly, it's amazing. And also the brand, just Old Forester, man, they're doing so many interesting things that are exciting in the business, you know, whether it's just the standard 46%, which is in my opinion is a great standard whiskey, but it's also all the interesting stuff from Statesman, 1910, 1920, so many interesting things going on. So from me, thank you very much, mate. Much appreciated.
Oh, thank you, guys. I mean, that is, my pleasure to be here. I mean, otherwise I'd be sat just probably watching Our Girl or something like that. I don't know, like on BBC iPlayer. But which, to be honest, it was actually my girlfriend's watching it. I'm like loving it, but I'd much rather talk about bourbon and kind of drink a dram with you guys.
Yeah, we're really grateful, Nate. Thank you very much, mate.
My pleasure. And sorry if I whittled on at the start and just kind of like was talking loads of crap, but ultimately, guys, I do these sessions in person, obviously when the bars start opening again. So if I ever do something in town, I'll let you guys know. And I do it all over the country, London, Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Scotland, cities in Scotland, everywhere. So come along to the sessions. I'll try and make sure that I advertise one here so you guys can come along. One thing I will just say is over the period, it's International World Whiskey Day today, right? So
is it?
It is. Boys, it is.
Did not know that.
It is. Exactly, yeah. It's International World Whiskey Day today, guys. But not just that, but also as well, there's a thing called virtual tip #virtual-tip-jar. And I think it'd be really cool if you guys could get involved. Basically, the drinks industry is obviously not operational right now. All the bars are shut down. If they can, they're trying to do drinks delivery services. That's great, but ultimately, it's not a great position to be in. But there's a charity called the Drinks Trust, which has been around since 1886. For those nerds amongst you, that's when Coca-Cola started, Pemberton Coca-Cola. But ultimately, they support bartenders and bar owners and drinks professionals on, when they're on hard times. And the principle is that virtual tip jar, every time you pour yourself a drink, okay, make a note of it, make a note. And then you can assign a value to that, say it's a quid or 50p or whatever. And at the end of our isolation period, when you're having your drinks, you donate the money to the Drinks Trust, and then they'll put that into the they'll use it to kind of support the bartending world and the drinks industry, and make sure that everyone's kind of on their feet again after this really, really awful time, because I've got a lot of friends in this industry and it's really, really tough. Fortunately, a lot of them I play Dungeons and Dragons with. They're quite, so, but I'm keeping them busy. Don't worry, keeping them. If I can't lift barrels and bottles, I'll lift spirits. But ultimately, it's check out this hashtag virtual tip jar things. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, if you send us a link, we'll share that in the group, Nate, because it sounds like a very worthy cause.
Yeah,
absolutely, guys. Absolutely. I think if Brian's still on the chat, then I'm sure he'll appreciate that as well. Brian Prescott from Ken Grain.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, awesome. Well, I think that's probably me bashing your ears enough. So, cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Nate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nate. Amazing.
See you soon, pal.
Bye, guys.